So I just want to welcome everybody to our sixth training in our series of six, and this is called Restorative Justice Practices, Site Implementation and Sustainability. And this is our kind of brand new training. So as Robert had said, we'll have all six of these once we get into the post editing and get it online for you. We had one person email us today, couldn't get here today, but she definitely is looking forward to at least seeing the recording. So, all right. So, today we'll have a small group, which is kind of nice for us because we'll have some ability to kind of do some things just in the larger group, even though we can still have some time to break out. So, what we want to do today is to facilitate an experience with participants to increase understanding of restorative justice practices, site implementation, and sustainability, along with essential components and considerations. We want to increase understanding of the importance of developing a restorative justice practices site team to help guide and sustain the implementation process. We'll be talking about some implementation science that's connected with this, and I hope that it'll be helpful to you. And then let me ask, how about if I could ask Lisa, would you read this one for us, Lisa?
Yes. Begin with staff first. Hold staff and department meetings in circles. Ensure that staff have access to regular check-ins and become accustomed to using circles. You are planting seeds that are allowing staff to experience the benefits of RJP without being forced to implement as a whole school initiative.
And Lisa, would you be willing just to comment anything that you've read here, if it sort of either you have a question or you have a comment on any of it?
I do have a question and I do have a comment. Okay. The comment is that I do have regular check-ins with my staff. So we do what we call a ground zero meeting. Since we've returned, we haven't done it, trying to figure out how that's going to look, because we're trying to limit gatherings. Yeah. So it may be via Zoom for this school year. But in the past, we would do ground zero meetings, and we always had some type of text that we were reading, even if it was an article or a book that we were studying as a whole, that was supportive, and we would discuss it and, have different activities around that. And staff really loved that and enjoyed it. I got a lot of positive feedback about that. And then I have one-on-ones. For some staff, it's every week, and for others, it's every other week, where they get 10 to 15 minutes to just come in and do a check-in. And it's not about task list. It's about, what do you need? How are you doing? It's just really a check-in on how they're feeling and how they're feeling about the work, but not going over a list of items. My question would be, what does it look like to have, when you say meetings in circles, what does that look like? Yeah. So what we try to promote is, even before, like an official kind of hey, we're gonna try to be a restorative school, or we're gonna implement restorative justice practices. As an administrator, you can certainly hold meetings in a circle. Of course, with COVID restrictions, things do, obviously there's other restrictions. Sometimes you have to do it via Zoom, like you were saying. Or you can do it out. I've had these circles outside, but what I've noticed is just the use of circles is a extremely beneficial thing for any leader, because what happens is the circle actually holds space, and it holds people kind of accountable to each other, where when they're not in circle and they're at tables or whatever, it kind of lends to people kind of disengaging and going on to their electronics and checking emails and texts and Facebook and who knows what.
And that's really not how a meeting should be run. You know, a meeting should be run about, hey, this is our time together. This is ground zero. This is our time to come together and see each other. So if I was there, seeing somebody like Lisa, that's important as a human being. I see her body language. She sees mine, and we hold each other accountable, and we're also responsible to each other. And when I hear, for example, Lisa say something like, hey, I woke up, much early, I had a restless night. It elicits understanding and empathy in me. And that's humanizing Lisa for me. And I really, really, really promote the humanization of all of our staff. They need to know who each other are as human beings. We share, we share a lot of the things that we hear in check-in, even though check-in can be very quick. I've had back pain before. I've had, years of problems with my back. So I can relate and feel for Lon, who is a part of our virtual circle today. Why? Because she had a chance to say it. If she wouldn't have had a chance to say it in circle like we have right now, I would have no clue that Lon is having back trouble or that she has ever had back trouble. So what it is it humanizes her to me. I connect with her, and I can start to have that feeling like Lon, when we say in Lakesh, because you are the other me. And that's kind of, I don't know, does that make sense, Lisa?
I've actually helped and actually coached principals through how to use circles in faculty meetings in this very useful, tangible way. Not that check-ins aren't useful, but I can just give you some examples of how it went. So a specific set of circles that I can think about was about when the schools were returning back to in person. Yeah. And so this principal actually wanted to help their staff, kind of meet some of their more emotional needs and around the uncertainty and stresses. And so what we did in the circle was really, use the problem, kind of problem solve in circle. And it was, we had asked several prompts, and that's where the prompts become really important. What are some, what's an opportunity, or what's a kind of bright spot, and what's a challenge? And then as people went around kind of sharing their concerns about returning, or concerns about the issue at hand, what it really did was I thought I saw this unfold, and I thought it was really, really cool. That people were I'm really worried about how am I going to engage, because they were simulcasting. How am I going to engage my, students at home while I'm also teaching in class, or I'm really, concerned about having to use this technology, or, whatever. So as people kind of went around and, shared their concerns, what ended up happening was you saw people go, wait, I can help you with that. I can help you with that. And actually outside of the circle was where they started connecting. And because, look at the teacher got to bring up their concern. Oh, I don't know how to use this program, and I'm supposed to be relying on it. Well, the other person in the circle heard that, hey, I'll come to your classroom right after this, and let's figure it out. Let's walk through it. And so that's actually I kind of think about one of the potential for circles is of solving a problem that we collectively have. And so I would also think too, faculty meetings, the whole thing doesn't have to be in circle, or you can mix it up and have oftentimes I know there's PLC groups. So how can we do that in a circle fashion? Because I know, for example, in PLCs I've been in, there's always the dominant voices. And there's the quieter teachers, who are just kind of scoping it out. So playing around with the format, depending on the size of your staff, it's totally all possible. And I have some more kind of very specific ideas, but yeah, that's just an example.
And then let me ask, Lon, would you be willing to read this for us? Transparency with school data.
Sure. Share in a staff meeting your most current and district data that demonstrates the most essential victories and weaknesses. Celebrate the victories and ask staff to break out in small groups to reflect on the weaknesses, developing and discussing intervention ideas to improve results. Then share their thoughts with a large group.
So this is pretty much saying, Lon, to, have them, give them their current kind of local data, have them look at that, have them analyze it together, choose out the victories and the weaknesses, and then begin, obviously celebrate the victories, but really look at what is it that they feel is going to be the most important to try to tackle. And then, but do those in small groups and have it come back to the large group. Lon, what's your thought on that?
I was actually in one of my groups yesterday talking about this, where how so many faculty meetings, staff meetings, or even just the overall conversation is so focused on negative, lack, what's not being done right. These test scores aren't high, and so I think that this actually speaks to that celebration of what's going well, because you can only say our scores are low so many times before people start, when that's the narrative, it feels unmotivating. And so I kind of think that this is a good way to think about it, how we, naturally our human brains, just from an evolutionary perspective, we focus on the negative. That's what we do as humans. We see problems that we try to fix. And so really kind of doing this thing where it's not about being positive, because I know there's this rhetoric in education that's so much often about improve. And it's okay, but did you take sufficient time to say, here's what's happening, here's what's going well, not just to motivate people, but to be honest. I think there's some honesty there that's required for the effort or so I actually think it's a more accurate view of the data rather than always this, we need to improve this and this. So I think it's, that's just kind of what I was thinking about.
Go ahead, Jen.
I just want to say it has a lot to do with growth mindset. I mean, just like a kid who for years and years is told, oh, you're a bad kid, you're a bad kid, you're a bad kid. That kid looks for any possibility to have attention, even if it's negative attention. And I feel like you bring bad data, oh, you guys, here's our bad test scores, what are we going to do about it? I feel like it's a better reaction to say, look, here's all the great stuff you've done. Here's all the things we've accomplished in the last however many amount of time. And then, okay, so here's some data that we need to work on. So I'm going to give you that. And why don't you guys talk about how we can improve, and put that in the hands of the teachers and say, look, I want to hear from you. What are your ideas? That's a more positive culture than just blaming the teacher for all these bad test scores.
That's great, Jen. I really like the way you talked about, really celebrate those victories and acknowledge those, but then allow the teachers to be able to kind of say, let us look at the data. We've got ideas. We know there's problems, but if listen to us rather than just imposing on us what you think are the ways to intervene on these problems. Because that empowers them, it gives them choice, it gives them voice. So that's really what we're looking for, is that really a way of utilizing even circles, small circle to large circle, things like that, to be able to even examine data together and have real discussions and make sure that positive is brought out though. So, Robert, I want to just, because we're close to 2:00, could we take a 5-minute break and a stretch break for us? Erica, are you available to read this for us?
Yes.
Thank you.
Implementation, science, and continuous improvement. Number 1, exploration. Reviewing school data, conducting surveys, empathy interviews, and considering intervention models. Number 2, installation. Securing training, supports, data systems, and identifying committed pilot staff. Initial implementation. Students receive services with a focused group of educators, monitor initial data for improvements. Number 4, full implementation. At least 50% of educators committed and implementing and outcomes showing improvements.
That's great. Thank you, Erica. Now, Yeah, some of you are probably already aware of the implementation science. This is the basic kind of steps, right? And so when we're talking about implementing restorative justice practices, it really should follow similar steps to this. And it really needs to have in that what Tamara talked about earlier, patience, I think she was mentioning, right? And in a long-term view, so that when you think of exploration, you're not, you shouldn't be going, oh, we're in exploration, so yeah, we're also, implementing restorative practices. It's really a time where what you're doing is you're taking people through a process of exploration, installation, initial implementation, and then full implementation. And really, even full implementation in this kind of paradigm is not even saying that 100% are implementing, if you notice, right? But it's at least 50% of the people. So we're going to kind of, talk about this, kind of get through it, and kind of always try to relate it to that restorative justice practices, because sometimes I know, I think it was you, Erica, that mentioned some of the outliers and some of the naysayers, that they can really be a barrier. And part of trying to, I guess, deal with that is doing this kind of a process where you're actually taking the whole school through a process of reviewing the data and doing surveys and things like this. So, and the exploration process, and maybe what I'll do is just ask Jen, Jen Hansel, would you be willing to read this for us?
Absolutely. Exploration process. Take the time needed for the staff to explore different options to address issues at the school. You and other allies suggest RJP training for all staff to gain understanding, clarity, and learn how this can be practiced in the classroom and other parts of the school.
Thank you, Jen. So I'm not sure if this is clear, but you understand this being a part of the exploration process, and you're needing to take that time to go through a process with the staff at the school.
On the previous slide, it mentioned empathy interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important part of the staff development process, is to understand where they're coming from and what they think is important, and kind of what they see happening in their own classes, because I think a lot of staff, or my own colleagues, feel undervalued because they don't feel like anybody listens to what they have to say. So that whole part of that exploration process of evaluating, what do I think my kids need, and then being able to voice that is really important.
That would be, that's a great example, using empathy interviews. And then, for example, if people would interview Gen students, they're going to hear things like, well, I don't feel like my voice matters. I don't feel that my ideas are valued here. So what would happen is you would gather that kind of, through the empathy interviews, that kind of feedback, and you would begin to then give that feedback like in a report form to all the staff. Like, this is what our students are saying. This is where the problems are lying according to them. And then what it does is it makes them, first of all, gain understanding. And the hope is that they would also have that desire, like almost like an empathetic response to it. Like, how could we help our students? Oh, we didn't know they were suffering that way. Let's come up with some solutions to that. And that's
also follow through as a leader. Like, if your staff are saying, this is where I see a need, or this is where I see a problem, ask for suggestions and then actually put that into action, or find someone who's willing, or come up with solution, and at least try something that is going to be moving forward in the direction of what your colleagues are saying.
That's really important, Jen, that the community sees that the leaders are listening and that they're then doing something about it, even if it's not like the perfect, the perfect, well planned out response, but they're doing something in response to hearing the needs of our community. It's really, thank you for bringing that up. And then another part of the exploration process, and let's see, Tamara, would you be willing to read this for us?
All right. Exploration process. Continue to use circles in staff and department meetings, as well as IEP meetings, parent meetings, and other school meetings when appropriate. Provide 2 to 3 hours of RJP orientation training that is experiential for staff, and gather training feedback from staff and ask how many feel this would benefit their school.
Yeah, thank you, Tamara. So this is really that exploration process, and during that time, you can use circles in all these different ways in IEP meetings, parent meetings, and other school meetings. You can also provide a little bit of orientation training. You're not really at that time during the exploration process, you're not necessarily going to provide 2 full days of training or something. It's really about kind of providing a taste of it to see how staff respond. All right, thank you for that. And then we're going to do this in small groups, but we want you give your opinion of what percentage of positive staff responses you would need to move forward with the whole school RJP initiative. And what would you suggest if less than 50% of the staff responses were supportive of implementing RJP? So, that kind of puts, I know this puts you in that you have to really think about this. What would you do as a school leader if, you went ahead and you were thinking, what's the percentage of my sort of whatever that is, where it hits that line and you go, okay, I feel good about moving forward with this.
Installation and initial implementation. Provide training and support for a focused number of staff committed to implementing RJP. Collect baseline data and, as you progress, monitor classroom data, teacher observations, student behavior referrals, student surveys to measure if there is increased student engagement, improved behavior, and an increase in a sense of belonging and safety. Share the results of this data in future staff meetings.
Thank you, Lisa. And I know you just read this, Lisa, but is there any thoughts on this? Just kind of providing that for example, you made that decision as a leader because you've taken people through the exploration process and you got enough positive feedback to say, okay, at least a certain number, a focused group of our teachers really want to take this on. So you provided them really some good training, and you collected baseline data of what you feel you want to measure. It may be different than what I put down here, but this is the basic kind of stuff when it comes to that. And then you actually go through the process and begin to collect some post data as well and share those results of the data in the staff meetings. What's your thoughts on this?
I mean, it's such good stuff. And I think just for me, the key is that it is a process and that it is not top down, and that to be patient and to be very intentional about the process, that it's, not something to be rushed, but be really intentional and follow the process.
Awesome. I love that. I just don't rush, follow the process, be intentional, all of that. And then Jen Hansel, what you were saying earlier, just recently, you were saying it follows along with a lot of what we're seeing here, because this is a focus group of teachers, I guess those positive teachers you were talking about. But what do you think about this?
I guess I wrote down what Lisa just said. It's a process, be patient, be intentional. And I think that those 3 things are really important when you're trying to implement something new with a group of people. sometimes you introduce something and everybody has their own time to process things. Sometimes I go to a training and a year and a half later, I'll think, oh man, this is where I'm going to use that. Like, it takes people time to process how that's going to work for them and how that works within their own. I use this for pedagogy because it's new information, and you might be learning new Google something or a new Schoology or a new platform or a format that you have to use right now with your kids. And this is something that's going to mull around in the back of your mind for a while until you figure out how it's going to work for you. And I think sometimes it has to come around a couple times for teachers to say, oh yeah, this totally makes sense. Like yesterday, I was saying, it's like the perfect storm for change right now. I feel like there are a lot of new teachers and there are a lot of veteran teachers. We had a lot of retirements this year and people who resigned and are rethinking their lives. And I think right now it's a big time of reflection. And so I think people are thinking about, how do I do things differently, or how can I do things differently to meet the needs of my students? And I think that thought of meeting the needs of my students is at the forefront of our minds now more than ever. And so I think it's just about teachers finding the time to reflect and us and leaders having the patience to let them have the time to figure out how that's going to work for them.
Wow. I like that, Jen. For leaders to really create space for teachers to reflect, right? And it may even be part of their, who knows, maybe a staff meeting, they kind of give some time to reflect. And maybe some people like to ask people to journal down some ideas, different ways of reflecting and thinking. And then maybe small groups where they're having conversations. So, and then, like you said, be patient with this, but be, also vigilant. And I always say this, just because you're only kind of initially starting this implementation with a focus group of staff, it doesn't mean that you're stopping your circles in your staff meetings or in your IEPs or in your other department meetings, things like you can still continue to plant those seeds of really, it's a best practice anyway, as a leader to do that work. It's just that you're not saying to the whole school, I expect everybody to do this and do it now. It's more of a gradual implementation. When we focus on a full implementation, meaning you've gone through that initial implementation and installation, you now have made a decision, okay, we're going to go to now teachers are buying in. They kind of maybe are, have seen the results from the data that you've presented to them. And it's not just you as the leader, but it's a team of leaders. And so that's where we talk about really then developing a restorative justice practice school site leadership team. And that team really should kind of include in the people that you see here, like an administrator, a teacher, a counselor, or a social worker, a classified staff, a student. And I think Jen Hansel made me aware that you should probably bring in a parent as well. And I know sometimes it's difficult, but you want to try to be as inclusive as possible. And so as these people kind of are representative of parts of the whole school community, they also will, like, in some ways, the school looks and feels that their voice is there through them. And so that school site leadership team really should be the kind of the ones pushing sort of the agenda. And let me just go here. So, like, for example, that they're meeting at least monthly, but I would say maybe even twice a month to ensure, that the RJP is actually the school priority. Sometimes if you don't have that group holding your feet to the fire, what happens is the restorative practices kind of get shoved to the back. And you want to make sure it's always on the staff meeting agenda. You always have a place for that. And that those people are the ones who are reporting out. like, oh, we looked at this data, or here's some new data that we just found. We want to share it with everybody. And here's some things that came out. Here's a testimonial from this teacher who's been implementing, or we actually have a video of a student or a few students that we interviewed, and they are really just raving about this restorative justice practices. So it's kind of their way to kind of lead the charge in some ways. But they also are the one, they develop ways to provide the training and support that support should include coaching and modeling, for all staff inside and outside of the classroom. Meaning, if you have a teacher who's, one of the people that's either trying to implement, or even one of them that's afraid to implement, and they're willing to have another teacher as part of this leadership team go into their class and actually model for them how to run a simple check-in or a small group kind of activity with the students in there, and then the students reporting back, just kind of demystifying for them by going in and saying, we want to support you. Right? That's our main thing. We're not trying to shove this down your throat. We want to help you. And then you tell us, what did you think of that experience? So, and making sure that essential data that measures the school's RJP progress is collected and shared with all staff. So this goes a lot to what I think what Tamara was really pointing out, that we need to develop these teams, and there's some things that no matter what happens, probably an administrator is going to have to do. But with this work right here, this group can do a lot, and it's a shared responsibility. Let's see. Hey, Jen Vermillion, would you mind reading this for us?
Providing RJP crisis intervention support. Teachers are encouraged and supported to manage conflicts in their own classrooms. In cases when teachers need to send students out of the classroom for intervention support, make sure to include the teacher in the intervention as a way to restore their relationship with students and model RJP effective strategies for them to use in the future.
And Jen, what does that mean to you? I know you just read this, but just kind of, what does it speak to you?
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of times, right, that there's this RJP implementation on a campus, and maybe there's a particular leader or team that is kind of in charge of it, but then they almost get expected to be the ones to solve all the problems on the campus. And so, especially like the second point, I think it's really important to acknowledge that there might be a team that's leading this work, but that everyone needs to be involved in it. And so we really need to bring others into this work. And so like what it's saying in the second point, for instance, if there's a conflict in a classroom, that doesn't mean that just because there's another team that is kind of spearheading this work, that they just take care of it. Because then what happens is student leaves, that teacher doesn't know what the heck happened. And then they come back, and not only do they not know what happened with that student, but the main issue is that that relationship was broken or was severed in some way. And so that's what the focus needs to be on repairing. Otherwise, it just looks like, kiddo got to go to, this little hangout room, talk to someone, have a little chat, and then, come back with a lollipop or something. And so we really need to focus on the root of the problem, which is relationships being broken. And you can't do that if the people involved in the, or that were affected by that broken relationship are not involved.
That's awesome. That's exactly what I was thinking, Jen. So thank you for articulating that. And Tamara, would you be willing to read this where it says adjust the master schedule?
Adjust master schedule to provide teachers. Let me move this. Provide teachers with time to implement relationship and community building circles. Develop an advisory period once per week where RJP relationship building and SEL are priorities. Ensure that time is allotted for professional development and community of practice time to share and learn from each other about successes and challenges of RJP.
Thank you, Tamara. And Tamara, is there anything in that you just read that kind of popped out at you at all?
I love the advisory period, and of course, making the time so that, you know, teachers can really try to implement these community building activities.
Absolutely.
But the advisory period would be really supportive at least once per week, because they're getting it regularly, and then they could reflect on it weekly, and then that way it becomes more a consistent practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And many teachers have communicated to me. It's like, they're like, yeah, I would do this work. I would, you know, but I just don't have the time. I've heard that many times actually from teachers. So yeah. And Jen Hansel, do you have any comments on this at all?
It was interesting because over COVID, our schedule radically changed from what it typically is. It became a modified quarter system, and we implemented advisories, and our staff had been very resistant to changing our schedule to be able to build in advisories into our regular day. And I found it myself, I just think it was a great place to have conversations with kids that you wouldn't typically have those conversations. And, you know, admin and the district made sure that we had lesson plans provided for us. I think it also provided admin and counseling an opportunity to reach out to the students when they wouldn't normally have that time to begin with. And it allowed the teachers to facilitate that time. So I think it built relationships in where there wouldn't typically be time to build those relationships. So I saw it work. So again, I feel like this is a time where we could survey the staff and say, hey, what did you think about this time period? What did you like? What did you not like? Would you like to see this implemented? Would you be willing to change our school schedule for this? Just get some feedback from teachers fresh on the heels of some changes that had been put into place over COVID, just to see what they thought. Like, you know, I think it would be interesting to see what they said.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and what I like is what, you know, you just confirmed that what this says on this slide is really what's needed, right? Because you were like, hey, you know, it gave us that focused time, the advisory period, to be able to really build relationships with our students. And I think it's important that we who are in leadership, that we listen to our teachers and kind of go, let's now you know, come together and think of a creative way, right? That we might be able to adjust the master schedule that still gives you that content time that you need, but it really gives you this space to be able to focus on this work. So thank you. And then Jen Vermillion, do you have any comments at all about this?
Well, kind of building off of what we were just talking about, and then also just earlier on, we were talking about the necessity and really the power of making sure that multiple voices are given the opportunity to kind of come to that table. I know whenever I go into a school, usually I'm going into a school as an outsider from that school. So it's even that much more important for me to really start the conversation with, well, what's working well? You know, where are you seeing successes? And not just at this campus, but, you know, if you've taught at another school, like what worked really well there? Where did you see success there? Even if it was not from you, but maybe from some colleagues. And so really starting the conversation off there, because that's a great point of, even in this time of COVID, there were, you know, obviously, even as a parent, I could see like lots of challenges from, you know, the education side of things, but there's also things that did work well. And so if we can, even if our structure is a little different, pull in or replicate some of the things that were working well for us, then not only are we not, you know, starting from ground zero, but we're also acknowledging just that that shared wisdom of the group too, acknowledging that as leaders, we're not coming in telling you, one, we know exactly what you're going through, and we have all the answers, and we're going to fix everything. But it's more of a group mentality of what, as a group, as a community, as colleagues, we're going to work to make this better together. So I think really starting there.
That's great. Thanks. Thank you, Jen. I appreciate that. And then we say integrate RJP with other school initiatives, right? And I think you all have been saying some of these things that I see here, like, hold SEL and PBIS activities in circles. And I think, honestly, one of the big pushes in this past, couple of years, I would say, is SEL. And it's kind of, in some ways, almost feeling it's kind of like mandated. And so if they're creating an advisory period, it's probably expected that you kind of have an SEL lesson. But
What's an SEL?
Oh, I'm sorry. Social emotional learning.
Oh, okay. I talk about it, social emotional learning, but I never make it SEL. So
okay. Thank you. I appreciate when you people like you, Tamara, ask me those things, because sometimes I just make that assumption. So the cool thing is that so many of these things, whether they be character development activities or lessons or SEL or PBIS, or they can be held in circles, and you can even do content. So, when it's appropriate, content in circles. You can break kids off into small circles and have them discuss history and, literature and other things that you're teaching, and then come back to the large group and have a circle discussion about it. So there's all kinds of different things, including your tier 2 and 3 interventions. Honestly, I would say almost all of them should be held in circles. And then I think we mentioned earlier IEP meetings and parent meetings. And then support for teachers in the classroom. And just want to ask Jen Hansel, would you be willing to read this one for us?
Sure. Provide additional training and support for teachers experiencing difficulties implementing RJP. Provide modeling for teachers in their classroom to learn effective circle facilitation skills. And provide a mentor assigned to provide additional support to struggling teachers, check-in, troubleshooting, additional modeling. And
Jen, what's your kind of reaction to just what you just read?
I guess as someone who people look to kind of provide support, I'm wondering, how do I become, or how do I, an experienced practitioner? I mean, I've been to a lot of teachers, of training of teachers, or whatever that is, where we are trained to be the teachers of teachers. And I just wonder if there's a program through SDCOE or somewhere that we can actually be approved or certificated or something to become an experienced practitioner, so we can kind of be that leader for our campuses.
Oh, that's a good point. You're probably a lot more skilled than you would admit right now, because I just get that sense from you that you have everything I've heard from you is very, well thought out, and I think you have a lot of experience, because you brought a lot of richness to this training, but I think you're right that even people like yourself who are quite skilled might benefit from having some kind of a program that they could be a part of that really helps them hone their skills and feel more confident to be, or
even a curriculum, you know what I mean? Like something that is kind of out there already that I could take back to like a professional development team and say, okay, guys, how do we think this is, how do we want to try to implement this on our campus?
Okay, good. Yeah. And are you talking kind of like almost like a training of trainers?
Yeah, like that's what I'm thinking. Like if it would be nice if, like our district already has set aside these TOSAs. Like what if we all went through a program where we were trained to be these people for our district?
Yeah.
And then there would automatically be one at every site.
Well, if like just as an example, one thing I wanted to say is when things like that come up, Jen, and anyone here, if you say, hey, I'd like to, maybe if all of our TOSAs could be trained in this in a kind of a deeper level or something, that's something I would be interested in helping with. And so what I would want to say is just reach out to me. You could talk to your colleagues, and then, I'll be happy to try to help with that. And that goes for any of you. Like, I want you to know that, obviously we have limited time here in these training sessions, but I want you to really know that I really value when you reach out and you say, hey, I have a question for you on this, or this came up. What would you suggest on this? Or would you be able to train all of our TOSAs or something like that? Because my answer is typically yes. That's what I try to do as much as I can, unless it's just impossible for me. But I'll bend over backwards if I can to serve you, Jen, and any of the colleagues that we have here. And any of the ones who have gone through our trainings as well. I think people know that that we want to be able to support you more than just provide this training. So thank you for that. And then, so really we're coming to the end now, and just wanted to kind of open this up to any questions or concerns about, like, we went over a lot of different things today, but just when you think about implementation and sustainability, and it's almost like what Jen just brought up right now, like, hey, we would like to kind of develop our skills at a deeper level, or if these TOSAs could be prepared so that they could really feel more confident and prepared. Something like that is what I'm thinking about. Like, if any questions or considerations that you want to bring up.
I was just thinking about how cool it would be for specifically, at least one of the gaps I've seen in available expertise. Not that it doesn't exist, it's just a little bit more hard to come by. Is like these collaborative groups for school leaders trying to implement restorative practices. And to me, I see that as a really big need, because the implementation science of it all that we touched on is what a lot of school leaders struggle with. How do I do it? How do I approach it? And so I think in my past role, I did want to kind of create these like monthly meetings where like we're holding space for administrators who are oftentimes, I feel like, at least from my perspective, I feel like they're dehumanized sometimes, and so like, how can we grow, like plant seeds with them by holding space for them as well? It's kind of to me like a waterfall, right? Like, hold space, let them experience it, share ideas, get to hear from other school leaders. And it's like a nurturing space, and then they can go and then like plant some more seeds of their own. And then, it's like so I guess that's just kind of what comes to mind. And I think the last thing is, when I think about the paradigm of restorative justice, I'm thinking about how it's really deep and asking us to be different, and just really like everything between the way we look at each other to how we operate, and like asking ourselves that question, like, what in our school cultures is preventing us from realizing this?
Exactly.
That's the question to me. So,
that's the question to me too. Exactly. Because that's, I think, why I took these trainings, is to see where is the disconnect between, these are wonderful. I've been learning about these for, oh my gosh, 9 years, if that's as long as Anthony's been doing it. And still, I'm not, seeing it. And so I guess my patience has worn because it's 9 years in the making. And so I guess that's why I come off a little impatient, probably.
Yeah, that's good point. And I do encourage you to come to our monthly. We have that collaborative meeting. It's a monthly meeting, and I encourage you to come. because what you may find is out of that, who knows, maybe something can be developed just for administrators or leaders or something. But many of the people who have attended, they are leaders, and definitely either administrators or they're just leaders in the fact that they're promoting this. They've been promoting this for a long time, and there's some really great people out there doing the work, and they're very committed to it. But you like, that's the thing. You almost have to be at their school to be able to experience that. So yeah, but we definitely encourage you to come to that. That's one thing that we definitely are committed to, having the monthly meetings. Yeah, we appreciate all of you and all the work that you do, your commitment to try to improve our schools, especially for our kids. Amazing work. So have a great rest of your afternoon. If you can do our little survey quickly, that we appreciate that, but just go and have a great evening.